The faint hum of a lawnmower echoed down the pristine suburban street of Maplewood Lane, where neatly trimmed hedges framed rows of immaculate homes. It was a neighborhood of uniformity, of carefully curated appearances. For Edith Mercer, a widow in her early 70s, Maplewood Lane was her sanctuary, a place where life was predictable until the Thompsons moved in. Edith first noticed them on a sunny Tuesday morning. Standing by her window with a cup of chamomile tea, she spotted the moving truck and then moments later the new neighbors. A tall, broad-shouldered black man unloaded boxes with ease, while a strikingly elegant woman with flawless dark skin directed him with a warm smile. Edith frowned, her fingers tightening around the cup. They didn't belong here, she thought. She had lived on Maplewood Lane for over 40 years and had seen families come and go, but never anyone like them. For days, she observed them through the blinds, cataloging their every move. The husband, Mark, was always smiling, greeting neighbors with a wave. The wife, Leah, exuded an air of confidence, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with the delivery drivers or tended to her blooming garden. To Edith, their friendliness felt intrusive, as if they were trying too hard. When a soft knock echoed on her front door one afternoon, Edith's pulse quickened. She peeked through the peephole and her breath caught. There they were, the Thompsons, standing on her porch. Mark held a neatly wrapped box, and Leah stood beside him, her smile radiant. "They're up to something," Edith muttered, her chest tightening with suspicion. Without hesitation, she reached for the phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need the police," she whispered urgently. "There's a couple on my porch. I don't know what they want, but they look threatening." The dispatcher asked a few questions, but Edith's voice wavered only slightly as she described the couple in vague, ominous terms. Minutes later, the wail of sirens broke the quiet of Maplewood Lane. Mark and Leah remained on the porch, confused but calm, as two officers approached. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" one officer asked Edith after she stepped outside, her arms crossed defensively. "They were on my property uninvited," Edith snapped, gesturing at the couple. Mark raised his hands, palms out. "We just came to say hello and bring you a welcome gift," he said, his voice steady but tinged with disappointment. He held up the box. "It's homemade banana bread. Leah baked it herself." Leah nodded, her smile fading as she studied Edith's expression. There was no mistaking the mistrust in the older woman's eyes. "We meant no harm," Leah said softly, her tone calm yet firm. Edith opened her mouth to reply, but something about Leah's voice made her falter. There was a familiarity in it, a memory she couldn't quite place. It left her unsettled, even as the officers diffused the situation. As the Thompsons turned to leave, Edith watched them go, unease bubbling in her chest. She didn't know why, but the woman's face lingered in her mind long after they were gone. Maplewood Lane had never seen anything like it. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the manicured lawns in sharp, jarring hues. Curious neighbors peeked from behind curtains and cracked doors, whispers rippling through the cul-de-sac. Leah and Mark Thompson stood on the porch, their calm demeanor unshaken despite the weight of the moment. Across from them, Edith Mercer stood rigid, her arms folded across her chest. Though her face was set in defiance, her fingers trembled slightly, betraying her unease. "Ma'am, we're here because you reported a trespassing incident," one officer began, his tone neutral but edged with curiosity. "Can you explain the situation?" Edith gestured sharply toward the Thompsons. "They showed up uninvited. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted. I was protecting myself." Mark took a slow breath, his eyes steady but weary. "Officer, we weren't trespassing. We came to introduce ourselves. We live 2 houses down, and we thought it'd be nice to bring a welcome gift." He held up the box of banana bread, still wrapped neatly in cellophane. Leah's voice, smooth but firm, cut through the tension. "We knocked on the door and waited. We had no intention of causing trouble." She turned her gaze to Edith, her expression a mix of empathy and restrained frustration. "We wanted to welcome you, Mrs. Mercer. That's all." The officer glanced between the two parties, clearly caught in the uncomfortable intersection of misunderstanding and overreaction. "Mrs. Mercer, did you feel threatened by them?" he asked gently. Edith hesitated, the weight of the question pressing on her. She glanced at Mark, his kind eyes meeting hers without malice, and then at Leah, whose poised expression was tinged with something Edith couldn't quite name. Disappointment? Recognition? Edith faltered, but pride and fear held her ground. "I didn't know them. I wasn't sure what they were doing here." Before the officer could respond, Leah took a step forward, her hands at her sides, her movements slow and deliberate. "Mrs. Mercer," she began, her voice steady, "we moved into this neighborhood because we believed in its sense of community. We hoped for kindness and understanding. But you've judged us without knowing us." Edith opened her mouth to argue but stopped short. There was something unsettlingly familiar about Leah's face. The strong cheekbones, the commanding presence, she'd seen them before. But where? The officer, sensing the tension had begun to shift, cleared his throat. "I don't see a crime here. It sounds like this was a misunderstanding." He turned to Edith. "If you're comfortable, I'd suggest you and your neighbors talk this through. No need for further action." Edith nodded stiffly, though her mind swirled. As the officers left, Leah lingered for a moment. She looked directly at Edith, her voice soft but pointed. "I think you know who I am," Leah said quietly, her eyes locked on Edith's. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away with Mark by her side. Edith stood frozen on the porch, her heart pounding. Leah's words echoed in her mind, stirring an uncomfortable truth she wasn't ready to face. That night, Edith sat at her kitchen table, the unopened box of banana bread sitting between her hands. The wrapping was pristine, the bough tied with care, a testament to the thoughtfulness of its givers. Yet guilt sat heavier than the box itself. Leah's words lingered in her mind, unraveling a memory she hadn't allowed herself to confront in years. She poured herself a glass of wine and opened her laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. With a deep breath, she typed Leah Thompson into the search bar. The results loaded, and Edith's breath caught. There, staring back at her, was a face she couldn't deny. Leah Thompson, civil rights attorney, public speaker, and nationally renowned advocate for justice. Edith clicked through the articles, photos, and videos. There was Leah, standing at podiums, addressing crowds, her voice commanding but compassionate. There she was, meeting with lawmakers, holding the hands of grieving families, and giving interviews on news programs Edith herself had watched. The weight of the realization settled over her like a shroud. This was no ordinary neighbor. This was someone who had fought for others, people like Edith's late husband. The memory came rushing back. Years ago, her husband, Harold, had shared a story over dinner about a young lawyer who had won a landmark case involving workplace discrimination. "She's something special," Harold had said, his face lighting up with admiration. "Someone who truly believes in fairness for everyone." Edith remembered the pride in his voice, the way he had followed Leah's career, citing her as a beacon of hope. And now, that same woman had been standing on her porch, offering kindness Edith had rejected. The next morning, Edith stood in front of the Thompsons' door, the box of banana bread in her hands. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raised her fist to knock. It felt like an eternity before the door opened. Leah stood there, her face unreadable, but her raised brow suggested she had not been expecting this visit. "Mrs. Mercer," Leah said, her tone polite but distant. Edith hesitated, her eyes meeting Leah's. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, terribly wrong. I made assumptions about you and your husband that I had no right to make. And her voice broke. "I'm sorry." Leah studied her for a moment, her expression softening. She stepped aside, gesturing for Edith to come in. Sitting in the Thompsons' bright, welcoming living room, Edith stumbled through her words. She told them about Harold, about his admiration for Leah's work, and about the shame she felt for how she had treated them. Mark listened quietly, while Leah's features softened further with every word. When Edith finished, Leah reached out and placed a hand on hers. "Thank you for coming," Leah said gently. "It's never too late to do the right thing." From that day forward, Edith's view of her neighbors and the world began to shift. Maplewood Lane would never be the same. And for Edith Mercer, that was a good thing.